Today we're going to talk a little bit about religion. Now remember, we're talking about the sociology, not the theology. Okay, as we go through this, you want to look at religion as a socializing institution. This is going to focus on the groups of religious, the behavior in the groups, and how the religion is intertwined with the society. Again, I emphasize this is not the theology part. We're not looking at the beliefs in God, we're looking at how beliefs affect society. Now, here are three different definitions of religion, and I really don't care which one you like the most, but I think I would pick the second one for our purposes because of the emphasis on the socially shared part of the definition. A religion that is held by only one person really does not fit the definition of a religion. Okay? Now, as we move to the elements of religion, I'm not sure your book does this really clearly, so I like to list them down. In order to be classified sociologically as a religion, you'll see the following elements. There's something to do with the sacred, something with the supernatural. There has to be a group of people that believe in this religion. There are always rituals, norms, values associated with various religions. Some of them are very similar, some are markedly different. There's always some kind of doctrine. Now, what we usually think of is the book, whether it be the Bible, the Koran, the Torah, whatever it might be. And a religion, by sociological definition, does have organizational elements. So this could show up on the test. One thing I do want to mention is the difference between these two terms. It's not the everyday use. When we're talking about sociology, when we're talking about religion, sacred is awe-inspiring, it's supernatural, it is not fact, it doesn't have to be empirical. Profane, this one's really different. We tend to think of this as being profanity. Well, no, that's not what it means. Profane refers to something that's ordinary, something of the everyday life, of our senses, not of the sacred. So there's a big difference. We see these other three terms, symbols. Well, we know what those stand for because we've talked about that in culture all the time. But in religion, they usually represent something sacred and have to do with the power of the religion. The rituals you see much more as formalized actions. This is the way the belief is acted out. I mean, you can't really see and touch a belief, but you can see and touch a ritual. They're meant to be extraordinary. They're meant to be special and fit with the symbols, the sacred that goes along with the religion. If you're talking from a religious point of view, magic is a ritual to make the supernatural come into effect. Now, whether this would fit with Harry Potter, that's another story. From the functionalist perspective, as you can guess, the three perspectives of religion are something that you really need to understand. So tie this little lecture in with all the material from your chapter. When we're talking about the functions of religion, we look at three basic ones. They provide meaning for people in the society, people in the subgroup. It gives our lives purpose. There's a definite emotional part to religion. Religions also function in society because they tend to promote a sense of belonging, social cohesion. They bind us together and help preserve whatever society we're talking about, or at least whatever section of the society we're talking about. They will also increase social control. Now, when you look at those three functions, of course, religion can be used for social change, but often think about how the control is exerted. It might be with change or it might be with tradition, but it gives us guidelines about how to behave. And it's often something we can look to in, tough times. Again, with the functional approach, the beliefs and rituals of religion bind us together. If you have one society that is bound together with one religion, Well, that's pretty good. That makes it pretty easy for the society to function. Now, it doesn't have to, as we certainly know, but you can see how the different cultures relate to having one society and one religion, etc. Now, your book mentions this, but I always like to add in the part of civic religion. These are all the beliefs and the rituals and the symbols, but they're of the society, not about the supernatural. There's no church beliefs, no God beliefs, but more or less state or national beliefs. Think of the flag, the Pledge of Allegiance, what we do when there's a funeral for the military, etc. And you can see the civic religion of what we believe in. Now, we don't have a state religion. The real term for a state religion is ecclesia, okay? Going on, we look a little bit at the dysfunctions of religion. Now, your book was going to give you some additional ones, but here are 4 that I'm just going to jot down. Be sure and pay attention to the additional material in the textbook. Okay, on we go, and we're going to move to the conflict approach. Now, this is very familiar to you by now. You know that from the conflict view, they look at things as the tool of the elites. So think of a religion, whatever one it might be, and the conflict view would say, look at how this religion is used by the tool of the elite people, of the powerful people. The conflict view usually says that religion is created by men to control men, and of course, to control women. The religion is used by the wealthy, by the powerful, by the elite, to get the poor to obey, to follow the rules, to bring down the sacred as saying, do what we tell you. Marx, of course, called it the opiate, but he really referred to religion as being able to give an illusion of happiness to those who were not well off. Religion from the conflict view is seen as a way to legitimize inequalities. Somebody who's born poor, somebody who's born rich. Well, that's God's will. It's divine. It's not something to do with man or something to do with what the wealthy should give to the poor and vice versa. The conflict approach generally says if you're going to escape poverty, you usually have to stop being distracted by religion. Now, religion and capitalism with Weber, or Weber as we should say, did look at the idea of religion with being profound social change. Now, of course, when we think of that, I think the tendency is to think that the social change would be good. Well, with capitalism and with the idea of the conflict view, the social change could also be very negative, very backwards, reactionary, not always going forward. But Weber did emphasize the part about how religion held the key to conversation. Now, the Protestant ethic is something that usually we take for granted that people know what this means, but that's not always the truth. If you look at the Protestant ethic, they really, really, really shaped America, and certainly fits back with social Darwinism that we talked about in the first couple of chapters of the book. But this really comes down to saying, okay, if you work hard, you'll have success, and that success demonstrates that you're one of the saved, one of God's chosen, in order to make it through this life. So certainly you can see how it fits as a conflict point of view. Now, in going a little bit further, we jump into the symbolic interactionist perspective. This one, in my opinion, you really can see how it fits with religion. Sometimes I have a hard time with symbolic interactionism in other institutions, but in religion, it really does seem to make a lot of sense. You'll see how religion serves as the reference group. Remember what that means from previous chapters. But the religion helps define us. It helps us create meaning. Think of all the symbols that are out there that have to do with religion, whether it's a cross or a menorah or a temple or a mosque, or even something that we do, whether it's genuflect or bow towards Mecca or whatever it might be, just by seeing a religious symbol, it brings certain understanding. Now, sometimes it's misunderstanding, but it definitely is a meaning for us. It has been interesting from many feminist theories that women's versions of a certain religion will often differ from men's versions of the same religion. But the focus here, from the symbolic interactionist perspective, is to focus in on the symbols, on the rituals, and on the rites. What do they mean to people? So again, it's not the theology that we're emphasizing, but it's the meaning that rituals and symbols, etc., bring to people. An additional point, and it already was mentioned a little bit, is whether it's any of the three viewpoints. There definitely are also positive impacts of religions, and I think we can think of those throughout history. So quickly, if you look at this slide, you see the differences: functional, conflict, and symbolic interactionist. And check out your book. There's usually a nice little chart in there, and make sure that you're clear on the three basics. Another thing that's brought up in chapters are the differences between churches and sects. So I figured rather than going over each one, this little chart tends to give you a pretty good definition on how to make a determination if one religion is classified as a church or if one religion is classified as a sect. Now again, this changes in culture by culture, so we would think of it in terms of the American culture, naturally. The next one is cults. Now, cults are a term that tends to be thrown around quite a bit. But for our purposes, the primary characteristic of a cult really is a charismatic leader. Cults will always ask for a pretty massive lifestyle change, just not one little change, but a lifestyle. They tend to demand total commitment and are outside the tradition. So they tend to be something new, tend to be something different, often a counterculture, but definitely at least a subculture. One of the notes I always like to bring up is if you think historically, all of the religions that we have began this way. If you're Christian, when you think back to the life of Christ, remember he was Jewish, and his ministry, his religion certainly began as a cult and then became a church. So a lot of these will begin one way and transform into another over time. Now, this chart, I don't want you to memorize. I just wanted it to I think it gives a good visual of the differences between cult, sects, church, and ecclesia. Again, ecclesia is a state church, right? Something that has been accepted by the entire state, the entire nation. And this one still seems to hold true. As we move on, here's a quick little thing about religion in the United States. We don't have any state religion. We are not a theocracy. Now remember, there are nations in the world that are theocracies and or have state religions. It is not necessarily the same thing. In the U.S., we have more than 200 denominations, and Christianity is by far the largest religion in the United States. Over 3/4 of the people of the U.S. usually will identify as Christian. Remember, there are more Protestants than Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, but all Protestants, Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, etc., are Christian. The percentage of Catholics has been increasing recently, due primarily to the increase in the Hispanic population. Now that definitely is changing. Here's just a couple of slides about the major churches and denominations in the United States that all claim to be Christian. Now, I don't mean that all are Christian. I don't want you to memorize these, but as you flick through the slides, you might notice there's an interesting thing if you correlate the members and then the number of churches. So really think the number of buildings around. And they vary quite a bit in looking at these. Then again, we've got a little difference here with including all kinds of religions in the US, not a memorization thing, just an awareness. This chart, this graph, this map gives you a pretty good visual impact of where the various religions tend to dominate. Anybody say subculture? And see how this can make a tremendous impact on a country as large as ours. Now, these points about social class and religious affiliation, again, not necessarily a memorization thing. And your book talks about this in text format quite well. But I think it does give maybe a neat little way to look at how social class, education, prestige is linked to religion in this country, at least still today, even though this one is about 5 years old. There has not been that drastic a change yet. When you look at the characteristics of the members of the churches, this again, oh my goodness, that's the same slide. I apologize. If you look at the ideas of race, you can certainly see that. Now, what does happen, and your book talks about the secularization thesis, is it seems to be that as countries modernize, it so far inevitably seems to lead to the decline of religious institutions, the power of them, the pervasiveness of the religious institutions. Secularization means that the focus goes away from the next world, away from faith, away from the supernatural, and focuses on this world. Really, we should use profane when you think about it. For some people, this is very disturbing. For others, it can generate a religious revival because they're going, wait a minute, this isn't all there is. But secularization certainly is increasing in the modern world today, and definitely in the United States today. Why religion continues to be an important part? Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. And I want to draw your attention to just kind of one of them, just to bring up some interesting points as we move into the social change chapters soon. Think about the mass media, think about technology and how it's enabled churches, sects, cults to increase. You're looking at having one church that's online with literally millions of people attending services. This has been absolutely huge in recent history and seems to be growing. Other institutions, and I don't mean to belittle this point, but one thing that sociology does is to think about the linkages between religion and the other institutions of our society, whether it's education, whether it's marriage and families, whether it's the family size, think contraception, etc. here, how religion is linked to the economy, to politics, to socialization. I do want to sit on this slide for just a second, have you think about it, because I'd hope you're able to think of some examples about how religion is shown in these other institutions. Everybody getting a hint that this might be important by the time we get to the exam. So, in short, despite secularization, religion continues to exert a major influence on society. Now, in a separate file, I'm going to put a number of slides about world religions. And I'm not going to narrate them, I'm just going to put them in there. Most of the information is also in your book. My point is, there's an awful lot to comparative religion, and it's one of my favorite studies. However, as a personal note, and this is just a personal note, I am amazed still about the commonalities between world religions, more than the differences. I hope this helped.